So welcome, Bob Moss.
Well, thank you, Nan. I appreciate doing this with you and sharing my thoughts and background. I was listening to that bio thinking I feel pretty, I felt pretty energetic this morning. Now it's kind of tired after looking at all the 36 years, but thank you very much.
You are welcome. You're a fellow in the Academy of Housing and Communities. You're selected as one of the men and women who've forged public policy and both the direction of both housing and communities. What role did you play in this arena?
I have played a lot of different roles, but I think that the key role that I play is problem solving, connecting people that can help solve problems for housing, community development in Washington, with states, with governors, with the changing environment that public policy is always working on. So I like to think of myself as a coach that helps get the team together and head in the right direction, no matter whether it's a single issue, overall legislation, or something that is non-legislative, something that is something that could be fixed through regulation, which is obviously the easier way to do things. So lots of different roles and very, very rewarding.
What are some of your thoughts on the last 50 years of public policy in the area of housing and communities?
Well, I think in the last 50 years, we've moved from the role of government in terms of funding affordable housing through grants and appropriated monies, which still occurs, to 36 years now of many years of having the low-income housing tax credit in play, which is a public-private partnership. And I think that structure, when it came about in 1986, was completely new to everybody. When I was working with the state agencies back in the day, and the program came about, they were very shocked to learn that they were now administering this tax credit program, and that they had to come up with a qualified allocation plan and have public hearings for transparency purposes for this program. And it's interesting how that's evolved. I know we'll talk about that, but it certainly, we've evolved from, a big federal role with little oversight and lots of problems, to a public-private partnership, involving the scrutiny of investors, state agencies, and the private due diligence. So, as well as some great asset management out there. So it's been a very significant change in our public policy in the past 50 years.
Well, what lessons have we or should have we learned from this?
I think, if you look at some of the other new programs, I think we're all kind of opportunity zoned, tired, with opportunity zone. And in this case, it's the same lesson for opportunity zones that we should always learn, which is anytime there's a new program, a new venture, something that we think is a good idea, I think the lesson learned is we have to track the data, and we have to make sure it's meaningful, and that you can have a story, but if you have a story with data, this is what it did. This is the accountability for this program. That's what Congress wants to hear.
That is really true. In other words, they want to know what the overall impact is in numbers.
They do, and they certainly love the stories. They love hearing, and they love going to grand openings. That's something that I think I can say I helped start. And when they get to the grand openings, it's it's the story they hear from a resident that then they hear back in Washington, or they carry back to Washington, and then they see the facts, the data. And I think that's how it all gets connected.
And if they don't, then they operate on perception, and oftentimes that is incorrect with a lot of the reality out there.
Yeah, it's very hard. I mean, when the affordable housing industry is a gigantic vegetable garden. Everybody has their own favorite vegetable, whether it's preservation, new construction, Section 8 versus tax credit housing. And all of those vegetables require water. And the bottom line is that Congress gets very confused over the notion of a quote unquote, affordable housing. This is what I think it is, or this is what it is. And it's a very difficult thing to teach to somebody brand new, because their first reaction is, well, why are there so many vegetables in the garden? And that's because they all play a role. When I testified before the full Ways and Means Committee, I was asked by a member of Congress who said, Bob, I have public housing, I have Section 8, and I have tax credit housing in my district. Which program should we keep? And I said, well, you keep them all, Congressman, because first of all, the tax credit is the umbrella over all of those other programs that helps those programs thrive, whether it's RAD or whether it's Section 8, or whether it's conversion of public housing. So the tax credit is not a program, it's an umbrella program over all of them. And I'm not sure if he understood that, but that's actually the truth.
Well, I think even within the industry, affordable housing has changed so much. We started out with calling it simply public housing, and then we went to subsidized housing,
right.
And now we've gone to affordable housing. And the garden has changed in the sense that it has grown with the types of vegetables, as you say, that are there. Because when we started in public housing, I started back in 1963 with the first housing authority. There was nothing there but public housing.
That's what some members of Congress think of right away. They think of big towers of dense housing, very unattractive housing. But we've also now shifted from affordable housing to housing affordability. And so we've kind of reversed the words to describe whether it's single family housing affordability, it's rental housing affordability. It's a real, that's kind of where we've gotten to now.
And when we talk about affordability, we should be concerned, because when you look at some of the large cities where one bedrooms are renting for $3,000 and up, who could afford that? We should be concerned about it for our children, if nothing else.
Yeah, especially with the lack of income growth we've had for quite some time now across the country. And there's certainly communities are more aware of that. Members of Congress are more aware of that. If you look at the last significant housing bill that we had, the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act, we had 190 House co-sponsors, a record level of co-sponsors, historic level for any housing bill we've ever had, ever. In the Senate, we had 37 with another 10 in the queue, ready to sign on. Unfortunately, we did not make it into the latest omni spending bill that occurred this week, which was passed by the Senate today. But we were in the finals. We made it to the Super Bowl. We were right there. We just didn't quite get it in. But the demonstration of the co-sponsorship level is something that we should be very proud of, and we can build on that. So the next time around, maybe we're going to be at 300, or maybe we'll be at 350 in the House of Representatives, because it's recognized back home by those members. Hey, I've got that problem back home.
So what happens when it isn't included in the big spending bill, or I guess you mean in the budget? I'm not sure.
Well, that is correct. Yeah, in the budget, in the year-end budget to keep the government open, that's where it was not included. So what happens? We start over. It's a new season. We look to the next Congress or the next session of Congress. We look to the next tax opportunities we have for the low-income housing tax credit, and we go from there. And we get stronger. We keep working harder. We get better. We regroup. You know, I played college, professional tennis a long time ago in the old days, and you know, you just learned that, you know, maybe you have to make your backhand better, or maybe you have to do this better, or improve what you're doing. So that's what we're going to do.
So if something is in a continuing resolution, and I think that's what you said, right?
The continuing resolution has been finalized with the budget passage today by the Senate. The package was put together, last week. It started on Wednesday as a skinny tax package of about $300 billion to go into the what they call an omnibus, which is tax and spending. By the time it got to this past Monday night, it had grown to 1.4 trillion.
Oh.
So we were in the mix, and which was the fix for the 4% bonds. And right up till about 9 p.m. Friday night, we were in the mix, and we just didn't quite make it. So we lost by a field goal, and we start over again.
So Bob, looking back at your career, what do you think is your biggest success story?
My biggest success story is I recognize people that I think could be great mentors, and I wasn't afraid to ask questions or to provide creative solutions in the jobs that I worked in. And a lot of times I would get shut down but it didn't keep me from asking. I was, very lucky to have all of these people around me. And I'd say the biggest success story was probably at Boston Capital, which is an unbelievable group of people. I set up the origination network for the company across the country. And through 20 years of 200 hotel nights a year, and every state QAP meeting, every public hearing, every state housing conference, from North Dakota to Texas to California to Maine, I participated. And I was lucky to have that opportunity. And in doing so, we set up a very successful origination network across the country to work with developers, nonprofits, and builders to place the equity from the tax credits that they received. And was able to create a team to follow up with me even after I left, which continues to this day, which I'm very proud of.
Kind of a legacy.
Yeah, I guess it is. It's certainly you don't want anything successful to die, so it's continuing to this day. Yeah, and being copied by others.
What were some of the biggest challenges you faced in your role?
I think it was that we were, as we were evolving from the permanency of the credit program in 1993 up until 20 years later, 2013, you've got to remember that during those periods of time, technology changed. The world changed during that time, and so did affordable housing. We used to receive allocation lists from the state agencies via the fax machine. There were no websites. There was a phone you waited for to use your phone code in the airport, and you know, nobody had a cell phone, and that changed. And then I think when you start to look at some of the challenges to the program over that period of time, from back in 95, Ways and Means Chairman Bill Archer had decided to eliminate the program. Was one of the battles that we had. We won. And I think that really launched us on the role of, okay, we need to be constantly educating people on this, or it's just not going to make it. So, but during that time, you know, I went from I had a thing on my, you know, a scanner on my belt. What they used to call those things. You used to get the little messages on them, the little, like the doctors have.
Oh, pager, like a pager?
Yeah, I couldn't remember the name. I had the pager, and then I had, you know, the BlackBerry, and then the BlackBerry phone, and then all of a sudden you a flip phone, and then you end up with an iPhone, and I mean, all of that happened in 20 years. While we were out on the road every day in all kinds of weather, you know, talking to housing people across the country. And the only time I ever really realized that is when I open up my drawer here and look at all of my old devices here and laugh, including the 1993 NCSHA membership book. So.
That's funny. Yes, I remember those days well. What thoughts can you share with us on your views of HUD and various secretaries or presidents or congressional committees you work with? Whatever you can think of that would be helpful.
Well, there's a whole bunch there, but I think that if you look at, a lot of people take a look at HUD and they look at the HUD secretary, staff generally at HUD, year after year, administration after administration, work very hard to not only roll out their programs, but implement them. And I have never had difficulty working with anybody at HUD under any administration. So I know sometimes people are critical of HUD, but their hands are tied somewhat as well. It's nice to meet the secretary. It's always nice to meet a presidential appointee and a cabinet person, but I tell you, the people that work at those desks that are committed to getting the work of HUD done are pretty fantastic people. They never really, they're there for in and out. They're there through several various secretaries over the years. So presidents have always been good to work with. We've always had great bipartisan support from our presidents. I am not so sure where we are currently, but I can tell you before that, you know, the program has been supported on a bipartisan basis back to when President Reagan signed it into law. And that's a whole nother story, but you know, it has had the support of Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton made it permanent in 1993. And the congressional committees you work with, you know, they work with the tax committees most of the time. So that's the Senate Finance Committee and the Ways and Means Committee. So when you're talking to people like who I love, was former Senator Olympia Snowe from Maine, who's a Senate Finance Committee member, was the first woman in the world, in the country, to be elected Greek American to the state legislature, then the Senate legislature, then the House of Representatives, then the United States Senate. She always said one thing: Bob, whatever you do, be relentless. Just be relentless.
Good advice. So what was that another story back in the Reagan era when it was getting started?
Well, it was interesting because the trailblazers at Boston Capital were Herb Collins, the chairman of Boston Capital, and Jack Manning, who runs the company today. Herb was a prominent Republican and was on Reagan's Economic Council. And then Jack was a very prominent Democrat with the Democratic Party in the New England area, which is very strong. He was very close to the various Democratic leaders, including the Kennedy family. And the story really is that the 1986 tax reform draft bill came to the president's desk, and the tax credit program was not included. The draft was sent back with other changes, and 2 weeks later, the final draft came back to President Reagan. During that period of time, Jack and Herb went to Washington, D.C. I don't know quite the details, but they said they had a successful trip. And the final draft contained Section 42. You know, kind of, that's how you do it. And it was pushed through by Senator Bob Packwood, who was the Senate Finance Chairman. And even to this day, he's still around in DC. I'll see him, and he'll say to me, Bob, tell Herb that credit was a good idea.
Let's talk about the future. And the question might be, you know, what do you feel is the biggest challenge in our arena today that we're facing?
I think the biggest challenge we're facing right now is a combination of labor and then material costs and overall costs. You know, for Congress, affordable to rent means affordable to build too. So I think we got through the latest GAO cost review pretty well. They realize there's some parts of the country that are different than others, but everything's more expensive to build these days. And outside of affordable housing, if you're replacing a garage or you're doing an addition, it's so expensive to do things. That trickles down into affordable housing and housing affordability for the future. So one of the things I think of is how is technology going to change to allow for housing properties to be built overnight 50 years from now. And I think about modular, and I think about stackable modular, and I think about some of the things that are happening in Europe right now. I look at the training, the regrowth of shop class and the regrowth of not telling every kid they need to go to a 4-year school to take on immense debt so they can graduate for a job that doesn't exist anymore. I think with the average age of a master plumber in Texas at 65, we have to really start to consider how do we mentor kids to go into the trades and support them and help the economy. And then I finally think of 3D printing. 3D printing is in its infancy, but 3D printed houses have been printed for $10,000 in Austin, Texas, ready to go in 24 hours, and fully functional 2-bedroom homes. And so I know we were going to talk about the biggest changes in the next 50 years. Not to skip ahead of you a little bit, but I think it's those kind of things we're going to look back and say, well, that really happened. Remember when they used to, it took a year for them to build a 100-unit apartment complex, and and now if the land is available, it can go up by next week and be there, and people can live there.
Isn't that amazing?
It is amazing. It's, I mean, I think we all know that that's going to happen, right? We can't really visualize it. We can't really figure it out, but we all know that's going to change. As everything changed in our last 50 years, even in the last 30 years. So I think we have, I think we're going to see technology enter the fray and bring down the costs, bring down the rents. And hey, you know, I'm all for it. If we can build homes that are that affordable, that fast, then we're not going to need any federal help other than maybe management. And that's, you know, maybe we won't have federal funding for housing in the future because we can build it so cheap.
What do you think about the location of housing for the future? Do you think it's going to be in places where we're close to transportation, or you think it's going to be more in urban areas? What are your thoughts there?
I think it's been proven it'll be near transit sites because, I mean, for those urban areas that have that type of infrastructure, I think you're going to see what started under Governor Mitt Romney, which is that he took a hands-on approach to the qualified allocation plan, and he actually added that, made that a requirement in the QAP many years ago when he was governor. That's continued to this day. But I also think in the more rural areas or the smaller towns, you're seeing an intersection of healthcare and housing. So housing, we always used to think of housing in rural maybe next to a church, but I think we're going to see it next to regional medical centers, especially for senior housing. You're going to see it on VA campuses now that we've helped the VA overcome their fear of leasing land to developers so that veterans housing can be built. So I think you'll see a change in you know, the word community start to really be considered with healthcare at the same time.
Interesting. I certainly notice in so many cities how downtown housing has become so prevalent. You know, I think about back to San Diego when I first moved there in 1985.
Yeah.
The downtown was just nothing. And now you go there and there's tons of high rises with very expensive condos overlooking the ocean.
It's you know, that's a modern tale for the return of the vital urban areas in our country, and it was in that same period of time that big cities were not doing well. If you look, Chicago was having its problems, New York City certainly, others, Philadelphia, and you see a return to those urban challenges because of convenience and because of the changes in generations. I don't know if I'm going to be able to sell my house in 20 years because it has a lawn. Nobody's going to want a lawn. You know, things are changing all over the place. So I think the return to urbanization. I also think that we really need to focus on rural America as well, because it's very almost harder to do rural housing than urban housing because of the lack of population, but there are people there that need it. And we need to kind of revitalize some of the older programs for rural housing, tweak them, make them work better, get them through Congress and start to have all of the small towns in this country benefit from new housing.
Good idea.
Or revitalize.
So if there's a life lesson to pass along to those younger people that we were talking about, what would it be for you?
You know, a life lesson for younger people is to look for your mentor. Look for the person, ask them the crazy questions. When you pick a mentor because of their character, how you see them as a leader, and I think it's so important that from the other side as a mentor, that you look to your right and you look to your left to see who is younger than you are, who can you help, and who can you mentor, because when you do, it comes back to you 1,000 times.
The pay it forward thing.
It is. And I think that's a really great part about the affordable housing industry. There are no secrets in the vault. We're all trying to learn from each other, learn lessons. And if you're looking for something, a life lesson to pass to younger people, it's learn through asking, through inquiring, through if you don't know something, raise your hand and find out about it.
Well, thank you so much, Bob. You've shared so many great things with us, so I really appreciate that.
You're very welcome, Nan, and have a great day.
Thank you.
You take care. Bye-bye.
If you enjoyed this video, please join Kent and me, and please subscribe free to this channel. Share it with your friends and click on the thumbs up icon to like us.